So welcome to November's Cloud Office Hours. This month's topic is Microsoft ATP. I'll be presenting today, Bob Ballard, your principal cloud strategist, with some backup with Jeff Fowler, our senior security strategist. So agenda, we'll go through the session. We'll have some open mic questions at the end. Feel free to also send things in the chat window. There's some folks on from Planet that hopefully can answer them. Maybe Jeff in particular, if there's any questions that pop up in the window, you can sort of focus on that. That would be great while we're going through the presentation. So welcome your URDIOTA team, myself, Jerry Martin, Aaron Ward, George Scott. They're part of the cloud strategist team here at Planet. Mary Tucker, who keeps us all in line and makes sure we follow up and do all the things we promise to do. And it's all being driven by the guidance of our Vice President, Steve Winter. Don't forget that as a URDIONIT customer from Planet, you can email the URDIONIT at go-planet.com if you have any sort of burning questions, whether it's on this topic or another one. That connects directly to the cloud strategist team. We have an SLA of trying to respond to those messages at least with a, hey, we're looking up an answer for you within 24 hours, so feel free. Again, I wouldn't use this as an emergency, my server's down. That's sort of not the route to go for that. But if it is a, hey, we're trying to better understand Teams or we're trying to understand the difference between, using today's topic, Azure ATP and O365 ATP better, et cetera, that's a great place to go out to get responses from the cloud strategy team. So today we have a very daunting topic, right? And what I mean by daunting is it's pretty comprehensive. One of the biggest questions we get from our customers is, seems like everything is called ATP today from Microsoft, everything is called ATP, and what do I get when, and what do I have to purchase, and all of those kinds of things. So I thought that I would cobble it all together and say, here are all things Microsoft ATP, here's what they do, here's how you get them, and here's how they work and what they can do for you. So if you're an executive summary person, you're going to love this first slide, and if you're a super duper one, you can hop off after this one. I'm just kidding. There's a lot of great information afterwards, but I searched high and low. So many of you know me, but if you don't know me, I spent 14 years at Microsoft prior to coming to Planet, so I know all the places to check. I searched high and low for some sort of great Microsoft chart to tell you this. The answer is there isn't one. So I put this together to talk about what are the things today called ATP. By the way, there's more coming, and I'll hint at that later. There's O365 ATP, and that really talks about content protection, right? That's email and your documents in the Office 365 world. It's geared at phishing, malicious URLs, things like that. I'm going to dig deeper into it. You get that when you buy Microsoft Office 365 E5, or you can buy it standalone, right? I can buy just O365 ATP. The next one is Azure ATP, which I think is terribly named, to be honest. But the reality is this is around identity and behavior protection, right? This is looking for malicious activities, crazy, weird, impossible logins, like all of those kinds of things. It's geared around your identity and user behavior. And are they doing things in your environment, or are the behaviors that can be tied to other similar behaviors and malicious activities? Can I identify them? Those come in Office 365 E5 and also is available standalone as well. The third one is Windows Defender ATP, right? And I can make all kinds of bullet points on this, but the big thing is this is not your antivirus software for desktop, right? This is significantly more than that. We're going to talk about it. That's available with Microsoft 365 E5, right? So the big package, and of course available also standalone. And then SQL ATP, which is a little different than the rest of these, but it's sort of living on the same branding name. And I don't have a problem with the branding name because I think it makes it easy to understand. These are smart, connected security services from Microsoft. it's part of the Azure Security Center, and it's priced per node, right? So it's completely differently. We're trying to protect particular SQL instances. So with that, Microsoft looks at these things to address the challenges, right? We need to protect the data. We need to detect compromised users and get visibility so that I can respond to threats. The important thing to understand is, what are some of the benefits from the Microsoft perspective on this? So who better to go to look at, sort of aggregated intelligent artificial AI, to use the buzzword phrase of the day, who has more information than the person where all the content and all the users are sitting, right? There are, hundreds of millions of documents and billions of emails, and millions and millions and millions of users interacting in the Office 365 and Azure Active Directory environment, et cetera, today. So, with Microsoft, you have not only the power of what's happening in your environment, but the power of what's happening in all environments and being able to leverage that. And that's built on the intelligent security graph. Microsoft loves the word graph. When you hear the word graph, that's sort of code word for, connected services. The whole point of this is woven in and out of everyone's Office 365 and Azure environments to help gain information that can then be aggregated and pushed out to each individual tenant so that they can protect you better. So, when we're looking at this, the intelligence security graph gets, and this is an amazing number, 6.5 trillion signals, interactions, data points, whatever you want to call it, per day. It's across identities, endpoints, the user data, other cloud applications, and infrastructure, right? So this is all piece of a very interwoven story. So this is another great slide. This was the only thing that I thought that sort of put some of these pieces together, right? So when we're looking at this, interestingly enough, that didn't build. It's not building. So unfortunately, my slide didn't build properly as I expected. But the idea is for identities, right? We have, Azure Active Directory, Azure Advanced Threat Protection. On endpoints, we have Windows 10, Windows Defender Advanced Threat Protection, user data, Advanced Threat Protection, Azure Advanced Threat Protection, Exchange Online Protection, etc. So they're all pieces. All these pieces together come to fill out the absolute story here. So let's start with the first pillar we talked about, right? Office 365 ATP. So the idea here is that we, take a look at, first things first, we rewrite URLs, right? So we're going to take we often get emails with URLs in them. We're going to rewrite them, have them point to the ATP infrastructure within Microsoft, and that way, the latest and greatest perspective on where that URL is handled, or what's found out about its destination, is always leveraged. And why is that important? Because sometimes when emails come in, it's not known to be a malicious destination URL, or the original destination isn't, and then they come back after the fact and actually convert it to go to a malicious destination. So I have the ability to get the latest and greatest on that. Secondly, leveraging sandbox technologies, which we can also, in a second, you'll see in a slide, look to ultimately detonate URL inside the sandbox as well as a secondary level of protection. But the ability to take an attachment, put it in a sandbox, which essentially means I'm going to put it in a safe location. I'm going to, when you open it, I'm going to open it inside that safe location, look at its behavior, see if it generates any network traffic, and see what happens if it downloads any files, so I can determine that it's malicious in nature. I can do the same for URLs and links in emails, right? To say, hey, I'm going to execute that, I'm going to see what happens, and then I'm going to actually take that link and say, that's a clean URL destination, that's a dirty URL destination, and add it to the reputation server. So, so the systems are continuously updating so that something that was that was not determined to be malicious initially, right, can be found to, can be updated later if it's later found to be malicious. And because of the way that this is interacting with your environment, even people that got the email 7 weeks ago, if they click on that link, the behavior is now changed. It's actually going to say that's a bad link. So you get the email with an attachment. It gets through the signature-based Exchange Online protection. But then it goes over to the sandbox service. The sandbox says, hey, this thing's got some bad stuff in it. It goes back, updates the signature-based Exchange Online protection. A new email comes in. It's got the same attachment. It doesn't have to go through that process anymore. It already knows that this needs to be blocked. It's blocked, and we move on. Right? So we're constantly learning and incorporating those learnings along the way. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say one thing important to note as well, going back to all those signals coming in from around the world to Microsoft systems, if that attachment shows up anywhere in the world for the first time, for example, and it's flagged as malicious, it instantly updates all of Microsoft services across the board with ATP. That way, when you receive it, maybe 20 seconds later, it's already been flagged as bad and gets pulled out, and you don't actually receive that attachment accordingly.
Right. And again, this goes to the impact of why wouldn't you leverage the person where all the content is sitting, the organization, the company, where it's sitting, because it's gathering the most data to most quickly react to these solutions. So, even have the ability to look even within your organization to find out, take a look at things of whether things are being spoofed or not, to find out whether the sender is actually really the sender, automatically block those senders that are spoofing and those behaviors so that you're not counting on your users to say, hey, make sure it's actually coming from inside. So, as we come back in, some important things about this is, so one of the big things about a lot of these solutions, especially initially as they came on, and a number of the third-party ones are, it really impacts sort of the end user productivity experience by slowing everything down. Hey, it's taking me minutes to get emails. Microsoft has very high performance on this and is actually able to sort of really minimize latency. And I can say, as a customer ourselves here at Planet of ATP, that's only improved over time. I would say 6 months ago, the latency was probably twice as long as it is now, and it keeps getting more and more efficient. Also, remember, I don't need to sandbox and detonate the payloads and all of those things if it's already been discovered across one of the millions of users in Office 365, so it just speeds up the process. So the other thing, we've been talking about email, but this is not just about email, right? I've got other content in Office 365. So, when we talk about looking at signals across SharePoint, OneDrive, Microsoft Teams, so we can actually look at inside, links that are copied inside of other documents that link to other documents. Is there macros or things like that embedded in Office documents that may be executing on malicious code? Things like that, redirections to risky IP addresses, all of that stuff can actually be done on documents sitting in the repository, even at rest. So, take a look at, your 0-day unknown malware. That's really, by the way, antivirus products and a lot of these protection products have gotten so good at figuring out the known. The real risk is always in, the first hours or day or so of attacks. And so the ability to improve your 0-day attacks, unknown malware, protect your users from malicious links regardless of what they're in. Maybe they were placed in a document 9 months ago before you were on Office 365. It was uploaded to Office 365 as part of a migration. They go to open it, use it. It still catches that, right? And then safeguard, across using virtual environments by sandboxing, executing what that stuff is. Maybe there was some macro in some document from 3 years ago that had malicious code in it. All of that is detected now. So the next piece of this, so quickly, that's sort of Office 365 ATP, right? It's about the content. It's about links and attachments embedded in documents and emails. So the next thing we go to is Azure ATP. So I thought the best way to talk about this, there was a lot of different slides. So just so you guys know, this deck doesn't exist. I had to cobble it together from a whole bunch of other ones. And I tried to think about the best way to talk about Azure ATP. And in my mind, I could go down on a slide with a bunch of bullet points, but I think the best way to talk about it is to just walk through a scenario in which Azure ATP does its magic, right? So, day 1 through 11, attacker compromises a privileged user that's not MFA enabled, right? Day 16 through 218, the attacker performs mailbox searches across Office 365. They use stolen credentials to VPN into the corporate network. They start creating rules on SharePoint to automate to automate data and get stuff out of your storage solutions. And then they move laterally throughout the organization using the privileged credentials. This is a scenario that's real and has actually happened. So just real quick anecdotal story. There's an education customer in which a similar attack that they compromised a user's account, got lateral, compromised a privileged user's account, started sniffing around, looked for keywords and terms within emails by creating rules that were forwarding things that had to do with payroll or things along of that nature, right? They actually got to the payroll system using the compromised credential, changed the bank routing information for the employee's payroll because they had a rule that said all email coming from this HR system automatically delete and forward it. So if you go into your payroll system and you change something, you get a notification that says, hey, you changed something. Well, they had gone into the user's Outlook account and actually created rules and had those rules delete those messages immediately, so the user didn't know. And so when the paycheck didn't come, they notified HR and said, why didn't I get paid this week? Everybody scrambled around. Well, they had done that towards dozens of users in the environment, and they stole hundreds of thousands of dollars. So this scenario is real. So what does that look like in ATP world? So, we go to the Azure, ATP, sort of dashboard here. We can see what's going on. We say, hey, we've got, these 3 users have risky behaviors, right? And it does a pretty intense algorithm to try to determine what those were. In this case, it was, hey, I logged on from a destination that wasn't a normal destination for me. I started doing some things in email and making rules that seemed unusual, some of these kinds of things, right? So I can click on a user and say, okay, what were they doing? What's the information here? Oh, hey, it looks like they had leaked credentials based on some behaviors. I can go in and see what my open alerts are. Take a peek at what what's going on with this within the dashboard. Drill down further on the alerts, etc. Oops. So take a look at what the suspicious activity is. Drill down, say, hey, from these IP addresses, this is what the login is. This is abnormal for what this user normally does, etc. Do I want to investigate further? Gives me a list of actions that I can click and take. So we can keep drawing down. Hey, there's a suspicious VPN connection, right? I can look in. Take a look at what's going on. Where did it come from? Why do I think it's suspicious? Hey, they're sitting inside the network and they're also VPNing in, and what those things were. Again, a list of activities and actions to take right there within the alerts. So a couple of things. One is, so this is fantastic and powerful and absolutely should be in your environment, right? But also, most organizations don't necessarily have someone who sits at a desk and stares at this dashboard to be looking for these things to come in. While this particular talk is entirely focused on ATP, there are other pieces of this puzzle um, that allow you to take action on these automatically through things like cloud app security and some of the other pieces of the puzzle. Um, Planet implements a solution that sort of is that we co-developed with Fish Hunter, with Microsoft, called Fish Hunter, that actually takes action on these things. I think Jeff wants to have something. He has something he wants to add here.
Yeah, so the great thing about looking at Azure ATP, which if for those of you who have E3 today, you might actually recognize this more as Advanced Threat Analytics. For whatever reason, they changed the branding. I don't know why. But Advanced Threat Analytics is the on-prem version where you can connect this to your domain controllers. So what this can do is, from ATP's consideration, it can actually watch your environment, see what's happening, collate the logs, use the different signals from your Azure AD for your identity information. It can query your local on-prem as well as your Azure AD for your device information, know which workstation someone's connecting to. It can query the intelligent security graph to see what's happening across your entire tenant, from email to you name it. And the nice thing is, it actually, from a practical application of this, I was with a client yesterday who was looking through their logs, and they discovered that one of their employees had suddenly logged in from Taiwan in Hong Kong, which is pretty unexpected. They expected them to be locally there where they were, and suddenly someone popped in 2 hours later from the other side of the world. So in that possible travel scenario, it can automatically detect this information and alert you to let you know what happened. In another scenario, they had a case where they're getting information from their firewall logs, and it was able to detect that someone was sending data out to a risky IP address in China. And with the integration they had in place, it actually allowed ATP to automatically connect to the firewall, make a new configuration to actually block that IP address, and that data automatically stopped at that point in time from going outside. So the important thing is that this can help filter the important things to front and center and alert you what's happening, versus you having to go through the logs and going across multiple panes of glass and see what's going on, where you can immediately see if someone's trying to do a pass the hash kind of attack or a golden ticket or impossible travel, and can alert you immediately, give you recommendations, can help quarantine systems this happens on, and really just makes your life a whole lot simpler overall through automation and security.
Thanks, Jeff. No, those were great examples. Thank you very much for bringing those. So I'll take ownership of this, and Jeff, I forgot to change it. We were talking about this earlier. So gain visibility into your threats using advanced threat intelligence, which is sort of the reporting and aggregation of all these statistics from the number of ATP products that are out there. It is not called Azure Advanced Threat Analytics. It's just called Advanced Threat Intelligence. It's just called Threat Intelligence. So I apologize for the mistype there. But we have a threat intelligence dashboard, right? Looking at malicious email by IP address and heat maps around where they might be coming from. Here are the top malware families that have been detected in the environment. By the way, detected in your environment or detected across all environments? What are the trends, right? Has it been trending upwards? What are some things that might be going on there? Who are the users that keep getting targeted, right? They clearly are doing risky behaviors, more than likely then, or maybe in some way they could be compromised or whatever it is. Who keeps getting targeted here? So what are the, sort of the weekly threat detections that are out there? What's been going on, by week, et cetera? What was stopped? What's been delivered? What are some of the global perspectives? I think this is really, again, getting yourself prepared to understand what's happening elsewhere. If it's not happening to me yet, it's likely to be happening. So what to be on the look for? What are recent alerts that I've gotten, et cetera, right? So the other side of this is, and this is something that I think is really powerful and something that most organizations have not necessarily matured to have sort of process wrapped around this, which is right out of the dashboard, I can make an incident report. I can actually, create a new incident report, do some investigation, get the data right out of the dashboard to go with it, right, to subsequent, to add sort of teeth and information to the report. Talk about what the remediations are, capture all of that as well. so that I can actually open up a case on an incident, talk about what I did, capture it, and then keep them around so that they can be reviewed. So if somebody says, what's happened, what have you been done, what's been done? Hey, this looks a lot like what happened before. What did we do? All those kinds of things are captured and aggregated there. Did you have anything to add on the incident management stuff, Jeff?
No, you covered pretty well. I mean, there's a lot of things you can gain here just by able to do the research, find out what's happening. 9 times out of 10, your top target is going to be the CIO, president of the company. They will also look for people in finance or HR to go get PII data or financials information is always a big target. They use this information to help traverse your network, try to figure out the links between people. And so this really helps you a lot with figuring out what's happening and get some protections in place to see what's happening and what you can do to protect yourself against future attacks.
Right, because again, the goal is on significant, threats is to take action automatically whenever possible, right? And so understanding what's happening and what you need to do when things look like this pattern, et cetera, that's really the goal, so that you're not sitting there staring at a screen. There will always be reasons to be reviewing the reports and looking at the dashboards and all of those things. But the more that you sort of aggregate information and build plans, then things can happen automatically. So moving away from a little bit from sort of what's happening on the backside of things, let's look at our endpoints, right? Which again is another area which can be compromised. So, we look at Windows Defender ATP. It's about reducing the attack surface, right? Protecting against new and different kinds of threats. Sort of detect and investigate, responding to those threats at the endpoint, right? Investigating and remediating, in many cases automatically, in minutes at scale, right? Learning from other tenants and what's going on in them as well. Tracking and improving the organizational posture, right? So what do we do? How are we doing it? And looking for advanced threats, right? So I'm going to drill down a little bit. So, reducing the threats, right, is giving control to applications, protecting against exploits, network protection, integrating with those, right, blocking traffic automatically at the endpoint. So saying, hey, these bad sites, regardless of where you are, because here's the really interesting thing. So I can build all these great firewall rules for my endpoints when they're inside my network and say you can't get here or there and these bad reputation places, etc. What about when those endpoints aren't in my building? We're increasingly mobile, government or not, right? Many organizations are significantly deployed on laptops, et cetera, Surface devices, all of those things. So what about when I'm not there? Well, if I push those, low reputation destinations, for instance, down to Windows Defender ATP, I can actually block them even when they're at home from those destinations on my corporate asset, right? So there's a lot of really interesting things that can be done there. On next generation protection, so antivirus software protects you from known malware, right? Some of them have some heuristics that can sort of predict if something's bad, okay? But in general, right, it's known malware. The reality is, fileless attacks, polymorphic threats, ransomware, things like that, these are things that are often not picked up by standard malware, right? That's where you can leverage things like machine learning. What is happening like this in other environments, and then I can take those patterns and gather them up and across all the organizations. Because what happens is Windows Defender ATP takes the information, sends it up to the threat management system. That threat response system then shares that across all the other threat response systems and pushes it down to the other clients. So attacks that happen to someone completely unrelated to you, and the lessons learned from that, are within seconds pushed down to your desktops, right? And so there's some really powerful things that can go on there. From endpoint detection and a response perspective, right? So looking for 0-day attacks that are executing on the machine, but from a cloud-driven perspective, right? So, looking at 6 months of historical data, custom detections, and threat intelligence feeds, all that stuff gets fed back down. I can actually take documents that are, so we talked all about what happens with ATP for content that's stored in Office 365, right? So hey, I'm doing URL redirection and all that stuff. Well, I can actually do that even on the desktop. I have a Word doc that's sitting in sitting on my in a folder or a file or a folder file on my machine itself. It had some URL redirection, a URL that's embedded in the document. It's been sitting there for 4 years. No one's opened it. It hasn't been opened in 3.5 years, whatever. Maybe it came from a machine that had once been infected, but since I got a new machine, I migrated all my content over. It's just regular antivirus doesn't pick it up. It's just a URL embedded in a Word doc. Well, I go back and open that Word doc. Bam, I can actually open that payload in a sandbox now, right? So it's about protecting you against things that already exist even. The intelligence that are getting around these attacks are getting smarter and smarter. So auto investigation and remediation, right? I can actually collect information on the machines that have been compromised, right? And then I can create orchestrations around what to happen when this happens, right? So I can actually say, hey, when these files, if I'm detecting the files are getting deleted from a process they shouldn't be deleted from, take these actions, remove it from the network if it's sending out too much chatter, all these kinds of things that are really interesting. I can push this all the way down to the individual desktops and control them whether they're in my network or outside of my network. So, I can take an asset inventory, understand what the security state of all my devices are, right? And talk about, how do I identify maybe where there's protection gaps in them. And again, this is all easily done regardless of the location inside or outside your network, because in the Office 365 world, my endpoints come from everywhere. So finally on, I missed advanced hunting. So the advanced hunting side, that's where we start taking this stuff to the next level and aggregating in orchestrated systems. Hey, I'm start aggregating information from what I'm gathering from Windows Defender ATP combined with Azure ATP to say these things together start to create risky behaviors, right? And so in the risky behaviors, because I can aggregate from what I was doing, so with Office 365 ATP, I can see a document that was created that combines with this risky login, that combines with this file that got copied to a local machine, and suddenly start to say, this is a really advanced targeted attack on a specific user. All of these pieces and parts integrate. So finally, I'm going to shift a little gears, and I wanted to include it because it's another thing called ATP, even though it's sort of different in perspective from the rest, and that's SQL ATP. By the way, I've heard lots of rumors from my internal sources that there's about to be Azure Server ATP as well, right? So the ATP brand is only going to grow, and it basically means connected, intelligent security and protection services for those particular products. So there are 3 pieces to SQL Advanced Threat Protection. It's data discovery and classification. That's currently in preview. It may have gone live. It's right on the edge, right? So I think it's any day now if it hasn't gone live yet. This is how we can classify, label, and protect sensitive data in your databases, right? These databases in particular are more sensitive than others. They should have different rules of protection. They contain PII, they contain HIPAA data, they contain some sort of compliance data, etc. They need extra stuff to be interacted with, right? really powerful and existing today as part of the Azure Security Center, vulnerability assessment. Go out and look at these actual databases, do vulnerability testing on them. It'll actually give you back a dashboard-driven report with remediation recommendations, right? And then once that stuff is all in place, I can do threat detection to say all the same kinds of things that we were talking about with users and identities. People are, risky behaviors are occurring around your databases, right? They're up in Azure, they're in SQL Azure, they're, whatever they are, they're, things, malicious IPs are trying to interact with them, etc. So again, I can access those, get access to protect those individually. SQL Advanced Threat Protection is actually licensed by node, right? So I have 10, 20, 30, 100 database servers. You just license them per node. So just a couple of screenshots of, hey, I go into the Azure dashboard, go and look at the security center. I can go into advanced threat protection, take a look and drill down on a specific SQL server or node, and walk through the steps in the wizard of how to protect myself. So is there anything you wanted to add, Jeff?
Yeah, a few different things with regards to ATP in general. A key advantage of ATP being in the cloud is that it's getting all your data from on-prem as well as all of your cloud services. And if you already have the Windows Defender ATP licenses and you've got it deployed across your environment, as soon as you log into the Azure ATP interface, the dashboard, it'll say, hey, you already have Windows Defender ATP. We'd like to integrate now, which is really, really helpful because when you look at traditional, ATA, ATP, it's looking at all of your signals coming from your domain controllers, watching what's happening across your systems, and things like that. Well, with Windows Defender ATP in place, it's getting all that data even when people leave your environment and they're wandering around on travel, whatever. So you still get those signals, and it actually allows you to, if you're doing an investigation in terms of what's happening with an identity in Azure ATP, it actually allows you to pivot directly to Windows Defender ATP in the same context of that identity. So it really gives you a lot of great advantages by having all that data collated and percolating up just the important things to raise to your attention, while allowing you to basically pivot with your environment to wherever you need to go to make sure you have the right information at your hands.
Thanks, Jeff. So I know that was a lot. We actually got through 70 slides in about 40 minutes. A lot of them were visuals and click-throughs, etc. But hopefully we were able to sort of attack the confusion around what pieces and what parts come with what. Again, I should have maybe pasted at the end, but to go back, Office 365 ATP is around content and URL redirection and attachments through email and Office documents, etc. Azure ATP is around users and behaviors, right? Windows Defender ATP is about your desktop endpoints, and SQL ATP is around securing the data within your databases, right? The first two, so O365 and Azure ATP come with E5. Windows Defender ATP comes when you go take that step up to M365 E5, and then as SQL ATP is licensed by node, right? And you can do specific nodes. You don't have to do all of them. There's no requirements there. So this is the part in our session where I always say this session is brought to you by O365 Advantage. It's the Office 365 managed service that we've launched here at Planet. So some interesting things about it. So of course it's all the typical things. Hey, if you need some managed services on your Office 365, whether you don't have the staff or expertise or would like to be doing more and would like to be able to lean on some people to help you paint pictures and envisioning, etc., that's in there. What I think is also particularly interesting is also we can potentially, on which plan you get, take it a step further, which is basically deliver a cloud enterprise architect timeshare to your organization to say, hey, I want 20 hours a week with a cloud enterprise architect from Planet. sit in on some meetings, make recommendations, do those kinds of things so they can feel like they're a part of the staff. Because one of the things that we find over and over again, and I think everyone from Planet on this call can say, is customers that are successful long-term with Office 365, they actually have someone that is painting the vision and marching towards the vision and implementing the vision. And oftentimes, organizations just don't have that person there, right? So, and at the same time, they can't afford to hire one. So if you can find one, they cost a lot. And so time sharing with one in something like an O365 Advantage plan is something that could be really helpful to organizations. So that's my end of the commercial piece. Are there any additional questions? You can feel free to unmute yourself and ask them. I know that thank you, Jeff, for answering questions along the way. Difficult to talk and answer questions at the same time, so I appreciate you being able to do that. Are there any other questions from the audience?
Maria, did you have a question? You were typing something a little while ago.
I missed the part about the licensing. So if I understand correctly, ATP is included with the E5 licenses except for the SQL, which is a license per node. Is that correct?
That is correct. And here, if you hold on one second, I will, it's a lot of slides to go back through, but hold on, I will pop it up for you.
Yeah, pretty much anything that has ATP in the name relies on an E5 license.
Whoops. Yes, yes. So here we go. One more before. There it is. Whoops. There we go. So there's the slide. I will make sure that I send out the deck to everyone who attended today. So that also, and this is on slide number 7 in the deck, sort of breaks down what it takes to buy. All right. Thanks everybody for attending. Hopefully this was useful. I know that even as somebody who understands how all these pieces and parts fit together, I actually learned something trying to cobble together the messaging for everyone. So thanks for attending and have a great day. We'll see you at the end of December.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Bob. Thanks, Jeff.
Thanks.